Welcome to Boiling Point, the podcast to motivate ever-evolving entrepreneurs and forward-thinking movement pioneers. Our hosts, filmmaker Greg Hemmings and executive coach Dave Vale, are turning up the heat in the world's business communities. Our interviews with entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and movement makers are raising the temperature of inspiration. Live from the hottest studio in this quadrant of the universe, here are Dave and Greg.
Dave, we are starting our third season today.
Has it only been three?
That's something like, I don't know, it's 52 times 3. We've got a lot of episodes in the can right now.
Yeah. And we got plenty more to come, and we got exciting guests, and I know we're going to talk about exciting guests in a couple minutes here. A very exciting guest for us. But it's just amazing to me when we started this journey. I mean, the thought of, like, it was like, how many will we drop these, a month? And, will there be enough people to interview? And it's this podcast world is massive. And it's just, there's so many interesting people. And they get, I almost feel like the guests, that have been fabulous. And they continue to be interesting and inspiring. And I'm really looking forward to today's interview.
Well, today I am incredibly excited too, Dave, because as you know, Seth Godin is somewhat of a hero of both of ours, and Seth is somebody who you and I both read on a daily basis with the email blog that comes in daily. I was really privileged to be one of the Ruckus Makers a few years ago. So Seth had a course called Ruckus Makers, where literally Ruckus Makers from all over the world came together in this little town outside New York City. And we just hung out for 3 days and just really got to know each other and listened to Seth teach. And he was very generous with a lot of the philosophies and concepts. And from there, Dave, I swear, we probably had 15 great Boiling Point guests from Ruckus Makers on this very podcast.
Absolutely, at least. So I actually felt like I was there with you. Based on all the conversations we had after. So we can check in with Seth today to make sure, the stories connect here. Because, it sounded like it was a fabulous time.
Exactly. And Seth, as I bring you in, I want to share also the story how I was able to ruckus my way into getting you into one of our previous films, The Millennial Dream, as well. So welcome to the podcast, Seth Godin. How are you, sir?
I'm fantastic. Thank you both for this work. It's super generous. And I don't think you ruckused or manipulated me into being in it. It was a privilege, just like it's a privilege to talk to you today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. So the story that I just love is that when we were at Ruckus Makers, you gave us the concept of shipping it. Like, if you're going to start something, make sure you ship it. Make sure you understand when the shipping date is, and you are not done until it's shipped. So when I went down to Ruckus Makers, I had the concept of Millennial Dream. But when I was going through the Ship It journal, I was like, okay, this is not a concept. We're making this film. And I remember sending you a note and saying, Seth, I don't know if I can actually ship it until I get an interview with you in your office in New York. And you graciously said yes. So thank you for that. That film has been seen by thousands of people in small group settings all over North America, as well as on Amazon and on PBS. It's made ripples. So thank you so much for the beginning of a relationship with that project, Seth.
Well, it's a pleasure. And the Ruckus Makers thing almost killed me. It was so much work, but because it was, I don't remember, 80 or 85 people. And I did the whole thing pretty much myself. I had 1 or 2 people helping me, but I even made you lunch every day. And
Good Lord.
It was super fun. But every time I think about doing it again, I get tired.
Oh, goodness sakes.
Maybe as a way of intro for people that aren't familiar with your work, could we start there? Like, what, like, and I know it's your bio expands way beyond Ruckus Makers, but what was, like, how did that begin? And that was a real introduction for Greg and you, and by extension, me and many others. But it sounds like it was a special event. I'd love to hear kind of how that culminated.
Okay, well, I'm an author. My 19th book comes out this week. It's called This Is Marketing, but I'm not really an author. I'm a teacher. And I became a teacher in Algonquin Park, Canada, north of Toronto. When I was 17, I began teaching an obscure sport called style canoeing. And on that canoe dock, I learned an enormous amount about enrollment, about possibility, about fear, about making change happen. And basically, the next 40 years of my life have been about finding a similar dock, a similar place where I can do the teaching that I want to do. And so every time I get a chance to recreate that feeling of energy and possibility and connection, that's what I seek to do. So the online workshops are like that, and the Ruckus Maker one certainly, more than almost anything we've done lately, really captured that energy. Because it's not about my ideas. Those are great, I think. They're worth reading. But what really matters is how you take them, shift them, share them, and then put them into the world.
And Seth, you've got a very robust history as an entrepreneur, certainly in the very exciting days of the internet and social media. But where does your heart for teaching come from? Like I see you as a teacher because I learn from you every morning when I open up your emails, and that takes a lot of energy for you to write that on a regular basis. But where does that heart of a teacher come from for you?
What I don't understand is why everyone doesn't want to make change happen. Try to figure out how to make the culture more like you think it should be. Try to help people get from where they are to where they need to go. It's like opening a door for someone who needs a door opened, but multiplied. And so once I saw what it was like to have someone stand a little taller or get to where they're going a little bit better, I was hooked on that. And the reason I'm a marketer is marketing is nothing but making change happen. That's what marketers do. And the way we make change happen isn't by blowing stuff up or knocking things down. We do it by teaching. And so marketing is just a particular form of organized teaching. And I feel like we only get one time around this go around, one culture to live in, and we might as well work to make the culture as good as we can.
Who do you find is most attracted to your work? Like, is there a certain quality? Does they come from a certain sector? There's a certain demographic? Like, who is it that you find is really inspired by your work?
That's a super question. When I started coming up in the business world in the 80s, demographics were everything. There was even a magazine called American Demographics. It was beautifully illustrated, all about, which states have the most people with a gun rack on their pickup truck. But I don't think demographics matter. I think psychographics matter. We didn't used to have access to psychographics, but now all social media is psychographics. People who like X like Y. People who do this, do that. And once you understand the psychographics of an audience, you can serve them better and you can reach them better. So in my case, there are several groups of people who seem to be attracted to my work. Certainly a big one is the psychographic of people who are impatient with the status quo, who are itching to make things better. And that's the place I go when I'm writing. I'm writing for those people, not for people who are looking for excuses, not for people who are looking for reassurance. I'm bad at reassurance, but I'm trying to set the table for people who want to make things better.
And one of the things that you just said, Seth, is something that I keep going back to in your new book. The book is This is Marketing, is people like us do things like this. Why don't we start by talking about your new book by going a little bit deeper on that statement, because it really, the focus of the book, it was a beautiful book, by the way. You kept on going back to that concept. Why don't we expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, that was going to be the title. That is what culture is. Culture is people like us do things like this. We can see a herd of rhino or gazelles. They have instincts. They always do it the same way. But humans are different. You go to one town and people are eating with their hands. You go to another town and people are using chopsticks. Why is that? Because people like us do things like this. So first we begin with, who are the people like us? What tribe, what group, what circle are you part of? And then the second question is, what are things like this? So if you think about podcasting, the technology for podcasting existed 20 years ago, but it's only exploded in the last 2 or 3 years. Why is that? It's not because it's a great business. It's because people like us have a podcast. And once you determine that you are people like us, then you got to have a podcast because that's what people like us do. Or you say people like us listen to podcasts. And so if you want to be people like us, if you want to be able to talk about Kurt Anderson or talk about Krista Tippett, you better be listening to podcasts. Otherwise, you're going to get left out.
This is marketing. And then the tagline under it is, you can't be seen until you learn to see. Tell us a little bit about how you came up with that premise, or where that comes from.
So here's the deal. Most marketers are short-term, selfish, narcissist egomaniacs. cut corners, and they yell at people. And they mean well. They do it because either A, they believe in their product, or B, they're in a panic and they got to make their boss happy. But in an economy that's based on attention, where attention is scarce, where people can walk away, yelling at people doesn't work. Mm-hmm. So the alternative is to do the opposite, to see people for who they are and to market with them and for them, not at them. And until you understand what the people you are serving want, what they need, what they think about, what they desire, they will not look at you. You're invisible. But the minute you see them and you serve them, then they can't wait for you to show up.
So how would you go about that, seeing people and really understanding? And, you know, because you touch on something that I think is so critical, and it's even, I'm an executive coach, and some of the best learning I got, in becoming a coach was, well, first off, beware of the coach who has no coach. So you got to be practicing what you preach. But the second part of it is listening to understand versus listening to respond. And this whole idea, this whole concept, and I just find it fascinating because I'm seeing when it happens and where it happens, it's incredible to witness or to participate in, and yet there's a big void. It's not happening in enough places. So I just from your perspective, how do you really see people and then be seen by them?
Well, let me try to give you an example because that might be easier. So in July, I was up in Canada teaching canoeing and did a session. There was a 9-year-old there, and you could just tell from his affect that he wasn't the captain of the football team. He wasn't the big man on campus. And here he was in this boat, 16 feet long, all by himself, and it was windy on TP Lake. And he got blown around a fair amount. And we finished the session. There was 20 or 30 kids there. And at the end of the session, he came up to me and said, I'm just not going to be able to come this afternoon. Sorry, I'm really busy. And that's an interesting statement. And I could inquire what he was busy with, and I could take the statement at face value. Mm-hmm. But what I understood he was actually saying to me is, I'm afraid. And I don't want to say I'm afraid because that will make me more afraid. It will make me feel insufficient. And if I had challenged him on being afraid, and if I had brought rational thinking to it, and I said, I've taught 2,000, 3,000 people, I haven't lost one of them, there's nothing to be afraid of, that wouldn't have made him less afraid. Because first of all, confronting it head on would have just amplified his fear. Mm-hmm. So instead, I said, let's go for a walk. And in the course of the 5 minutes that we talked, I talked elliptically around what he was dreaming of and what he was thinking of and what he was dancing with, and enabled him to reassure himself. Because I knew that reassurance from me is futile. Reassurance from the outside world only works for a minute. But if he could reassure himself and see that he might be able to go on a journey to become the person he wanted to become, then he could on his own make a choice about going forward. And he did. And we spent the next 2 or 3 days together, and it was transformative, and he's a different person now. And that's because of him, not because of me. But what I was able to do was open the door and stand a little to the side so he could take ownership of his actions. He could become enrolled in the journey. And I think this is a universal message for marketers of every stripe, that instead of rushing to sell someone the next biggest Harley Davidson or to get them to vote for your candidate, we have the chance instead to say, well, what is this person dreaming of and what's keeping them from moving forward? And how do we create an environment where they can choose to go where they need to go?
You know what I love about that story? Well, first, I love. I think there's a really great message for all the parents out there, and I can't help but listen to that as a father of 3 wonderful kids, and wishing I was a little more patient at times. And what I found interesting is that when you describe that, to listen and to be seen, and then or to see and then be seen, requires patience, and yet you an audience that's really attracted to you is impatient, and there's got to be some tension there, right? Or I'm guessing.
I love this. This is brilliant. Yeah. So the easiest way for me to meet external metrics would for me to sell easy, quick, simple shortcuts. That if you go to market with easy, simple shortcuts, the line out the door, as far as you can see. And I refuse to do that, and I've always refused to do that. Because what I know is it will inevitably not work. And the shortest route happens to look like the longest one. So in 1999, I wrote Permission Marketing. I wrote it in 98. So that's 20 years ago. And the people who patiently built a permission base ended up building Groupon, Google, Facebook, etc. And the people who took the shortcut, they're still looking for another shortcut. And it turns out that the best route to where you want to go happens to be the one that requires patience.
It is such a, and it's like totally opposed to your gut instinct, right? Because you're talking to two impatient, I would say, people, and at the same time, every business lesson I learn is to be patient and to make sure you keep your vision clear. And but I find that fascinating because we're in such a rush that we're missing all these wonderful stories around us and learning, and there's so much, so they're so rich around us. And part of what I'm really enjoying about a podcast is that it causes you to slow down, and have a conversation that I'd hope we could have over a coffee or a beer or whatever. But it's there's something about this medium I think that really supports what you're saying, Seth, in terms of just slowing down and actually as we're talking, because we're not across from each other, is just you really focus on the language being used and the expression of a story and that sort of thing. Are you finding the same thing in the podcast world? Do you think there's a reason people are attracted to podcasts?
Okay, so there's a huge asterisk we have to put here, and that gets to the idea in the book of the smallest viable audience. Mm-hmm. If I look at the most popular podcasts, they're AM shock jocks who yell at people, or they're true crime, or they're flavor of the month celebrities. All three are shortcut, thoughtful, fun ways that people, the masses, can engage with another form of entertainment. So if your goal is to be number one, you have to give up what you stand for and pander to the masses. But my thesis is that the most reliable path is to figure out what's the smallest number of people that you could get by with, the smallest number of people that could support you, and optimize for them. So, Hardcore History is one of my favorite podcasts. And Dan Carlin does not apologize for his 11-hour episode about Genghis Khan. So here's a guy with, he may have notes, he doesn't sound like he's reading them, no guests, no music, talking for 11 hours about Genghis Khan. And I got to tell you, I wish it was 12 hours. And as a result, Dan is doing fine. He has this audience that pays him, and it's enough. And that opportunity has never shown up in our world before, but it's here right now, to find an audience that's big enough to be enough, where you can do work that you're proud of.
Oh my God!
And not compromise, eh? There's no compromise. I love that.
Yeah. And I think it was a really nice transition as well, Seth, back to your book. You and I, when we've spoken in the past, we've shared some of our admiration for the Grateful Dead, and I want to talk about this because one of the funny themes about this podcast is...
Or we think's funny.
Dave is an ex-professional hockey player. I know nothing about hockey, and I'm a musician and a deadhead. So I swear probably 20, 30 podcasts we reference hockey or Grateful Dead. And if you're cool with this, I want to read just a few little bits from your book, because when we're talking about minimal viable audience and options, the Grateful Dead nailed this. Okay, and then I really want Seth to hear a little bit your thoughts behind it. So in the book you say, the Dead are almost perfect example of the power of marketing for the smallest viable market. They appealed to a relatively tiny audience and focused on all of their energy on them. They didn't use radio to spread their ideas to the masses. Instead, they relied on fans to share it to the world, obviously through tapes. Instead of hoping to encourage a large number of people to support them just a little, they relied on a small number of true fans who supported them a lot. Now, there's a lot more that you wrote about the Dead, but I'm fully with you that they created a cult, if you will, of fans who follow them all over North America, and other bands like Phish and many others have followed suit. But what is it that rock and roll example has that we can learn from in the entrepreneurial space?
Well, I'm going to skip the part about Phil Lesh having a brief career in the NHL.
There's the connection.
Well,
There
that's
you
as
go.
good
I
to
was
know
trying
now.
for that.
Thank you, Seth. That fixed a long road.
So here's the deal. It's 1972, and the Dead have a choice to make because Warner Records wants them to make hits because that's the business Warner Records is in. And Warner Records doesn't want them to encourage people to tape their shows because that's the opposite of the business that Warner Records is in. And it's worth noting that the Dead, who were one of the top, maybe the number one touring group, bigger than the Rolling Stones, bigger than Van Morrison, bigger than anybody, for 10 years. In 1972, it was pennies. They weren't making a fortune. So here's the choice. The choice is, do you want to play for the people who are in the room, or do you want to play for the people who aren't in the room? And that is the genius of Jerry Garcia. Because Jerry said, look, I know we can try to be like the Turtles or the Doors or somebody else with a silly name. Let's just play for the people in the room. And they were consistent with that decision for their entire career. And most bands who dream of stardom don't do that. They don't say to themselves, we need a whole new set tonight because it's the same people who heard us a week ago. Right? They say, we better play great in Cincinnati so we can get back on the radio so we can get more fans. And it's hard to have the guts to do that. But, I'm no Grateful Dead, but I made the same choice. About 6 years ago, I said, I'm not looking for new readers. I'm looking for the writing for my existing readers. And if they want to tell someone else, that's fine. But I'm not going to go on Shark Tank. I'm not going to spend my time evangelizing to strangers. I am here to connect to the people who want to hear from me.
And what happened as a result? Like, tell us what the last 6 years, what's unfolded for you, just by, in your, please feel free to brag or boast in any way possible. But I mean, it's so important to hear stories of how, when we stick to our principles and when we stick to our core values and we speak to that small viable audience, it's also great to hear the outcome of that.
My website traffic went down, my book sales went down, and I was thrilled because instead of writing a blog post to get more clicks, because I know how to do that, all I have to do is write 10 fast and easy ways to get more traffic to your blog. If I wrote a blog post like that, I'd win the internet, right? And instead, I self-published a book called What to Do When It's Your Turn. And because I self-published it and designed it myself and warehoused it myself and did all the pieces myself, it only sold a few thousand copies the first year. But now it's in its fifth printing and 150,000 copies in print, which for a self-published book that costs $30 is pretty extraordinary. And I had the freedom to make the book I wanted instead of a book a bookstore would be happy with, because bookstores aren't happy with books like those. And, instead of trying to figure out how to get non-readers to pick up a book that would appeal to them, I said instead, oh, I get it. I can write an ebook about education, give it away for free, and it'll reach the people I want to reach, and maybe they'll spread it. And that's a good day's work. So that freedom came only because I had spent 15 or 20 years earning a permission base of 1 million people who want to hear from me. It's enough. And now I can do better work for them instead of chasing the strangers.
Speaking of ebooks, one that I really appreciate you share, giving away to your audience, to your tribe, is placebos. And
oh yeah, the placebo one is a great example because people hate placebos. They hate every time I do a blog post about placebos, my traffic drops in half.
Really?
What I
want to talk about this because I love it. And confirmation bias, these are things that just struck me like a lightning bolt in my first year psychology course. I was like, I felt like something was unveiled to me. And, so to dig into it with you, because it's just as fast. And I actually read a book by this guy, Herbert Benson. He was this Harvard cardiologist. And
sure.
You're probably familiar with him. Like, I was fascinated by it. And I still am. But I love how you brought it into marketing speak, and around the story we tell ourselves that changes the way our brain and our body work. I mean, that's fascinating to me. So what is it that doesn't appeal to people, do you think?
People are worried that if they understand the placebo effect, it will stop working.
Ah,
okay.
So there's almost a religious connotation to that.
Oh, yeah. So here's what you can do for fun. I have done this. Walk into a health food store when you have a cold and say to the proprietor, "Do you have any placebos? I'm really uncomfortable."
You mentioned that.
And you've done this, Seth. How did it go?
I have. And the person at the front desk said, "I'm not sure." And she leaned behind her and said to the owner, "Hey, Doris, there's a guy here, he wants placebos. Do we have any placebos?" And then she turned, she said, "If you told me you needed some, I could order some for you."
Here's a pack of mints. Oh, that is brilliant. So, Dave, about the placebo, what is it, from the entrepreneurial perspective that really triggered you after reading that?
Well, I never, you know what? I thought of it more from a health perspective that really, I just thought this, and I guess what I read, and I'm going way back in time here, but this guy, Herbert Benson, but I was always fascinated by how kind of the idea that a placebo effect was poo-pooed, it didn't have value. And yet, it could make people feel much better as in this connection between trusting your the caregiver, physician, whoever that is, or how your body works. I just found the whole concept fascinating. Right, I never really thought of it in terms of from a marketing perspective. So I think that was really kind of an interesting leap for me to try to make in my mind. But it was such an important thing. I just don't understand why people ignore it. And I think, that's a good point, Seth, about this idea that they're worried it's not going to work anymore, or that it's going to take away its impact.
Well, it still is poo-pooed. So here's an example. For certain kinds of knee surgery, for runners and stuff, they've found that fake knee surgery is as effective for relieving pain as real knee surgery. Meaning you go in, they put you under, the doctor cuts your leg, stitches you up and sends you home. But that's all they did, is give you a scar. That is as effective as a fairly difficult surgery where they cut you open and then start moving stuff around and stitching stuff up inside of you. So if it can be shown that it's just as effective, where are all the people in the medical community screaming that it should be legal for them to do sham knee surgery? Because it should be legal, because it works. It works as well as real knee surgery, in fact. But you didn't become a doctor so that you could pretend to operate on people. And so it goes against the narrative of the practitioner who wants to feel like they're taking action. And that's what my book is all about, is the narratives of what are we here to do and how do we do it. And so, in terms of how placebos work for marketers, a great example is brainstorming sessions. A well-run brainstorming session actually works. A poorly run one doesn't. But the main reason a well-run brainstorming session works is because of the placebo effect. Because your body is saying to itself, well, if I'm here and I'm going through all this stuff, I'm under social pressure to share that idea that I was afraid to say out loud. That's a placebo. It's as a placebo as effective as if they did knee surgery on you. It's still the same thing. It's rewiring your brain.
Where it connects, and that's a great the brainstorming session, a great explanation. I think so in my world, in coaching, right? People can decide up front if it's going to work or not going to work before and they will be right either way, right? If they're entering a coaching relationship. But the highly motivated person who is in that, I guess I never really thought of it like this, but that's the folks that we're actually really interested in working with, and not people that need to be convinced, because we know half the battle and half the work all the work is going to be done by them. So they have to have this huge belief in this and believe, and even when you talk about price point and everything and the value of a service that's seen as, kind of a premium service, but not too high. There's just a lot of things that landed for me. And I thought, I just never thought about it from that perspective. and even how a confirmation bias plays into that. So thank you for kind of opening my eyes to that, Seth. And I just, and there for our listeners, I mean, you go to Seth's blog and you can download this e-booklet, and I think it's fascinating. I'm going to actually test this whole idea of putting placebo out there and seeing kind of how the metrics respond.
We do have children, Dave. We do have children.
Well, no. I'm thinking about just the audience. Like when you said, Seth said he puts a post out, and then your numbers drop. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I'm just fascinated by the topic.
And you know what? I think this is a good place to talk as well. Going back to the book, you've got 3 concepts, Seth, that, like a lot of your words, are a little bit surprising to read, but it's so interesting for me to think about. You talked about the tyranny of trying to be perfect. You also talk about the possibility of doing things better, but then the magic of good enough. And I'm just going to let you kind of fill in those holes, because most people in our culture are aiming for perfect, and they think maybe better is second best and good enough is not. But you've reversed this order. Can you expand on that a little bit for us, Seth? Okay,
well, tyranny is a place to hide. Perfect is a place to hide, and that's why it's tyranny, meaning you will never be perfect. And so since you can never be perfect, you might as well not even ship. That if you're a perfectionist, what you really are is a coward. Because what you're saying is, I have a good reason to hold on to this, to not share it, to not ship it, because it's not perfect. And I'm a good person because I'm withholding my lousy work from the world. Aren't you proud of me? No, I'm not proud of you, because you had a contribution to make and you chose not to make it because you've decided that you're afraid of criticism. And the only way anything gets better is by being in the world and being used and being improved. So the Model T wasn't a perfect car, but if you care about cars, I'm glad they shipped it. And version 1.0 of Word was horrible, but I'm glad they shipped it, because that's the way we move forward. And so possibility, which is a term from Roz and Ben Zander, is the idea that we can embrace imperfect because we are doing it with generosity. And we can look for the possibility of doing better next time, the possibility of learning something. And so what I'm trying to do is help people get past that noise in their head that's causing them to hide. Because the way our culture works today, people who hide aren't safe. They're on their way down. And you continue by saying people who aren't as gifted or generous as you are running circles around you because they are showing up as professionals. And yet too many people with something to offer are holding themselves back. And that's because they're aiming for perfect. Well, I don't think they're aiming for perfect. I think they say they're aiming for perfect. I think what they're actually doing is hiding. I think that's a brilliant way of looking at it. It's so true. And it's something, Seth, that I've gone through a lot with film, as a filmmaker. And we've had arguments with my staff over the years about pieces that are certainly far from perfect and do not stand up to the high quality that Hemmings House is known for. But all I want to do is release this stuff. And typically I do. And typically my staff gets freaked out at me. But then once they end up seeing the response, they're like, oh yeah, okay, we got through that one. That was okay. Maybe that worked. So I think this is something that we should actually embrace a bit more, is showing rough cuts, releasing pre-release chapters of a book, getting people to see kind of the process and the grittiness behind it. And that's not just in the artistic space. That's really for any of our products. Would you say that relates to any vertical, Seth, like outside of the creative space? It does, but I need to add something important here, which is I have never once said just ship it. I have never once said put your crap in the world and see what happens. What I have said is merely ship it. And what I mean by merely ship it is without commentary, without excuses, without a narrative. Do your best work, then put it in the world. Your best work, not the best work ever made, your best work. Don't ship it before it's your best work. But once it's your best work, everything after that, I'm not interested in. And it's kind of like, in a way, wouldn't it be your best work up until this moment of shipping?
right?
Yeah.
Because we don't know
Right. And so,
what the future
yes,
holds.
It is probably true that if you kept sanding that thing, it would get a little smoother.
Right.
And so there's a curve of yield. But when I run into people who say they have writer's block, I then say to them, there's no such thing as writer's block, and they get very angry at me. And I say, do you have any bad writing? Show me your bad writing. And if you can show me a lot of bad writing, books and books of bad writing, then we can have a discussion about how to make your writing better. But if you don't have any bad writing, then it's really clear you don't have writer's block, you have typer's block. And that's a different thing because you're afraid to type. And my point is that the way we get better is by doing the work. We have to keep raising our standards, but we can't use perfectionism as a way to keep from doing our work.
So what's the best way to provoke someone? I mean, because you're very provocative. I love how you express it. You make no apologies, in terms of pushing people. What do you find? I mean, and everyone's different, right? But I mean, what are you finding really helps push people over that wall of fear that they have about being exposed or whatever that may be?
Like the canoe student, even.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There you go.
For me, it's 100% about enrollment. The only motivation is self-motivation.
Right.
If someone can hear a story that enables them to enroll themselves in a journey, they will motivate themselves, but I can't motivate them.
So if they're willing, and that kind of comes back to trusting the journey, going, yeah, like that's got to come from within. So you just try to create an environment where they can find that within. You find there's
So I mean, an example is the marketing seminar, the one the book is based on.
Yeah.
It costs like $600. And I am eager to help nonprofits, and I regularly offer nonprofits a scholarship. And what we found was that our scholarship students never finished the course.
Oh,
they just didn't finish it.
Yeah.
But if someone paid for it, they were much more likely to finish it. Oh, so that's why we charge. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right?
So true.
Because they have enrolled in the journey. They're not sitting there on one foot with their arms folded, swatting at mosquitoes in the sun, waiting for me to prove something to them in 30 seconds.
Got it.
They've committed to a journey. And so one of the downsides of being on a podcast, the upside is getting to talk to smart people like you. The upside is having time to tell it. Is one of the downsides is if you're listening while you're running or you're listening in your car, you might just be passing the time. You might not actually be enrolled in the journey. You might say, yeah, I'll do it later. Other people are going to join a study group. They're going to join a mastermind group. They're going to get a coach. They're going to lean into it. They're going to take what looks like a risk. And you know what's going to happen? 2 years from now, you're going to wonder why they're so far ahead of you.
Incredible.
Well, and that's a really good place to remind folks that are listening of the importance of action, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk about journey, actually, one thing I want to throw out to you, Seth, is that I hail from northern Canada. I originally grew up in the Yukon, and have you paddled a river up there?
I have not, but your voice gave you away, of course. No, I am.
We're so Canadian.
I'm an Algonquin Park boy through and through. 1 year, I took my canoe with me, a cedar strip made by Omer Stringer, down to Cambridge because I went to Tufts, and I actually paddled on the Charles River, which was a sight to behold.
Beautiful. I bet.
And I have been on the Hudson River, which is a fjord, so it's salt water, which is not good for a canvas canoe. But those are the extent, because canoeing isn't my jam. Teaching is my jam, and canoeing just happened to be the place I started.
Yeah, well, it's neat to hear, and that whole idea of, there's, as a Canadian, there's just so much in paddling a canoe, so I couldn't help but think that. And then I also noticed in your about Seth Godin in your blog, you have a CBC video with Strombo.
The Strombo show.
Yeah. So
yeah,
I was like, I'm pretty sure he's American, but I love all these Canadian references. So thank you for that, because
I grew up in Buffalo, so we could ride
pretty much Canadian.
Yeah.
And Seth, I went to film school in Welland, right across the bridge from Buffalo. So I was down in those spaces a lot. So This concludes our discussion, Seth, and thank you so much for your generosity on a daily basis, and for you shipping every single day. Even that time I visited your office, you were writing away, and I was like, yeah, it is true. You write every single day, and there's so many different ripples that have come from that, and this podcast has become better as a result. So thanks for letting us share that with you. And yeah, we're really excited to continue, and we're subscribing into the boot camp course here at the Boiling Point Podcast in Hemmings House. Really excited to see where that's going. Seth, one last bit of words from you. What's the biggest call to action right now for people to engage with you today? The book is dropping this week. This is marketing.
Right. So if you go to seths.blog, seths.blog, you can read 7,000 posts for free. And if you go to seths.blog/TIM, there you will find a video I made about the book, some excerpts, and links to get a copy.
Awesome, man. Thank you for being so generous today, just with your wisdom and
this was super fun.
Yeah, well, I love it. And folks, get the book. It is amazing. And subscribe to. My call to action to folks would be to get the daily email, where you can read. It's fascinating. And I'm to be honest, I'm like, how does this man come up with inspiring stuff every day? Like, it does make me feel like I've got writer's block. I'll admit it.
And in
practice.
In the final spirit of giving, what I'm going to do in the show notes of this podcast is I'll put a link to a free version of the Millennial Dream. When I say free, if you have Amazon Prime and iTunes, you can get it anywhere. But we will put a link in there so you can see the elements that Seth brought to the documentary. So Seth, have a great rest of your day, my friend, and thanks again for being part of this.
Thanks so much. Go make a ruckus, guys.
All right,
Awesome.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks, Seth.
Okay, Dave, what do you think of that?
Bam! Wow, he is just such a brilliant guy, but he's so kind.
He's just so thoughtful and articulate.
Yeah. It's almost like, I'll be honest, it's a little intimidating because he's just so concise.
But you know where that comes from? Besides the fact that he's clearly a brilliant human, but when we were at Ruckus Makers, his whole thing about shipping was serious, and not only was he talking about shipping, he really challenged us to ship every day. Whether you're blogging every day, if you're making YouTube videos every day, if you're podcasting every day, whatever it is that you're doing, he doesn't say you have to do it every day, but get your frequency, stick with it, and ship. And I think he's been shipping on a daily basis for so long that he understands his message so clearly, and it shows.
Yeah, well, no, it's well thought out. It ties back to his whole philosophy and how to do business, to be patient. For those of us who are impatient, playing the long game. I mean, there's all this wisdom in it. But yeah, that was the first thing I was going to mention is he's and there's a calmness, right? In how he presents stuff, which is like, it's really quite, it really, for me, it pulls me in, it enrolls me. And I think the biggest, I guess, I got to start. I like the idea for me personally, a takeaway would be this idea of shipping it more frequently, whether that's every day or every week, but getting, that's a really good.
I think about that regularly. Now, it's not that I beat myself up, but when I get into a cadence of blogging on my Medium account, I love it. And I get into a cadence, and I'm even thinking what Seth says, stay consistent, do not derail. But then I do derail on another thing, whether it's more on the podcast or on another thing. So there is a discipline. And because I work in so many different areas and verticals, it's almost, I think my takeaway today is really drilling down to that minimal viable market that he talks about, kind of like the Grateful Dead did, and serve them. And what does that look like? Is it podcasts? Is it blogging? Is it videos? Maybe it's all of them. But if it's serving my minimal viable market on a daily basis in any one of those formats, that's what I'm going to challenge myself with moving forward.
Excellent time, well spent. So much learning. I mean, and I wanted to be respectful of his time because I tell you, we could have, from our standpoint, we could have kept the conversation going another hour, easy, or two, but
or 11,
yeah. But he was kind, just to give us the time he had. And actually, and on that, just something I want to point out is you saying, "Hey, let's like I'm thinking, Seth Godin on this podcast, that would be great. That would be exciting. That's going to be a big lift. How do we do that?" And you went and made it happen, man. So well done. And that's the way you roll.
I sent Seth one email, and
yeah, but you did. You took the time to do it. I think there's a message in that for people. Like for me and for others. It's just is get her done.
Get her done. Ship it.
Yeah.
Ship it.
Yeah.
And one last thing, folks. We have been doing well over 200 episodes every single week. Dave and I do this truly because we like to hang out with each other. And
200 episodes every single week.
We do 200 episodes a week. We ship 200. I don't know. How many episodes do we have, Kim? Do you know? Kim's with us. It's okay. She's all embarrassed because she's not on a microphone. 1,000. Who knows? But you know what? If you go check out boilingpointpodcast.com, hop onto our email list. Put your note in, because we've got so many other gems that have been guests on this podcast, and we want to start delivering them in the form of our email newsletter. So sign up, and we really appreciate it.
And welcome to season 3.
Welcome to season 3. No, I think it's season 3. No, this is terrible. Let's do some math. We got over 200 episodes, 52 episodes a season. So we might be going to season 4, Dave.
Welcome to the next season.
Welcome to the next season. Welcome to the next season. All right. See you next week, Dave.
See you, buddy.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Boiling Point. Remember to rate and subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter at Boiling Point Pod. To see more from Dave Vale, check out leadershipunleashed.ca or visioncoachinginc.com, and on Twitter at Dave_Vale. And to catch up with Greg, visit hemmingshouse.com and at Greg Hemmings on Twitter. Thanks for listening, and remember, keep that pot boiling.